What's good, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We have a very special guest here today. This is somebody who I've been following her on TikTok and Instagram for a while, and I was also a guest on her podcast. So we have sex therapist and clinical psychologist, Dr. Kate Balestrieri. Is that correct? So I'll let you introduce yourself so the people can know who you are.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Kate Balestrieri. I'm a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist, a certified sex therapist, a certified sex addiction therapist, and I'm trained in the PACT model of couples therapy. So I work with people as individuals, as couples, around helping them heal and thrive and have amazing sex lives.
That's fantastic. And that was a lot, and it sounds, when you put the forensic part in there, it sounds kind of intense. So how do you take, your background, and you have a lot of education, how do you use that to impact people's lives on a daily basis?
Yeah, great question. Well, so my career got its start really working in the prison systems. I used to work with sex offenders who had been incarcerated, and then after their incarceration, they were brought to a civil commitment facility for treatment because the state felt like they were too dangerous to go back into the community.
Okay.
So doing that, I really started to understand how little information people really get about sex education and how trauma and sort of a lack of sex education created this cauldron of opportunity for sexual violence and sexual dissatisfaction. So when I was finished working in the prisons and went into treatment centers and private practice, I really started paying more attention to people's relationship to sex. And it's really nuanced and really complicated, even though on the surface, most of us sort of keep it compartmentalized over here and don't think about it a whole lot until we're thinking about it.
Right. That's awesome. And as you talk about your background, it takes me back to when I was working, clinically back in Virginia. I was on a forensic psych unit, and I was working with patients who were NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity. So you're obviously familiar with that. And it's funny because the topic of sex will come up. And I remember one patient, he was talking about, he had some issues in his relationship. And he told me that at one point he didn't know that he had to ask his wife for consent. But she let him know, okay, I don't feel like this today, or I don't feel like, doing X, Y, and Z. And he was telling me, I've been married for 20-something years, and I just now realized that I have to get consent from my wife, And it's interesting because there's so much, with sex and mental health and boundaries and consent and making people feel respected, So what are some of the key things that you've learned in your practice that can help out the everyday person who watches you on social media?
I mean, how much time do we have?
Right.
I think one of the things that is super important, I think, to remember is that we all have a relationship to sex.
Right.
And it's one of those things that we don't really stop and think a whole lot about because we assume that our relationship to sex because it is our truth. It is ours. And sometimes it can be really hard to understand that someone else's relationship to sex might look and feel very different.
Right. Yep.
But it doesn't mean theirs is right or wrong, or yours is right or wrong, right? There are lots of ways to have a really healthy, thriving relationship to sexuality, even if that includes something that feels way outside of your own paradigm.
Right. Yeah. And I like the fact that, it's nuanced, and you can believe one thing and I can believe one thing, but we have to have space for people to be themselves, however their relationship with sex is, and so now you're on Instagram and TikTok, and I know you have over 100,000 on each platform. You're doing really well. What made you want to shift into that space? Did you feel like there were things that people didn't know that you could educate them about sex and mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like many of the mental health creators out there, I've been recognizing that people are hungry and thirsty for information about mental health. It's something that as social media has grown in our zeitgeist, people are really craving and they're responding to, because up until this sort of moment in our collective history, we haven't really talked about mental health on this scale. And we haven't talked about sexual health on this scale either.
Yep.
Yeah. So sex has always been sort of salacious in the public eye and dirty, naughty, bad, something you do.
Right.
So I really felt like, especially as a woman, it was important to set an example on how you can talk about sex in a really integrated, healthy way.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And even, stepping out of, the role of a clinician, like when I go back and I think to fifth grade and sixth grade and seventh grade, nobody ever taught us about sex. They just said, don't have sex, to be honest. And I remember like in middle school, they would show you like scary pictures of STDs. And they'd say, this is what happens when you do this, or this is what happens when you do that. And this, babies come from here. But nobody ever educated us and filled in the gap. So by using social media, we can help to educate people and, tell them like, all right, this is how you have a healthy relationship with sex and with yourself. And I think it's a powerful thing because like, I still don't know what the answer is. Like how can we fill in that gap? Because I'm not sure what they're teaching the kids nowadays. I have no idea.
I don't think they're teaching them much at all, except abstinence only in most places. Yeah, so many states are actually prohibited from including sex education in their curriculum for some schools, and then others have an abstinence only curriculum. Very few schools teach anything about pleasure, teach anything about how to talk about sex in a healthy way with people. They might talk about consent, but since they don't want you to have sex, they really don't emphasize how to have that talk about consent. So what we're finding now is that, especially in the age of the internet, so many kids are looking to porn because it's free and it's available so readily online. And that's where they're getting the bulk of their sex education. And I'm not going to put any moral judgments on porn, but as an educator, it's incredibly limited and in fact dangerous because it doesn't portray the real authentic kinds of sex that people are having. It's such a sanitized and curated fantasy, which is fine when you're an adult. But as kids growing up and seeing that as their only source of education, it's really problematic.
And kids are going to gravitate to that, when there's no alternative. And fortunately now we have sites like TikTok and Instagram where, if you can put out a compelling 7-second video, people will watch that. What's on TikTok specifically, what's been the response when you talk about, sex education?
So twofold. Either the videos go pretty viral pretty quickly. Or they get taken down because of the community guidelines. Yeah, so it's really hard to know how to get content out there that's going to be accepted. I had one video get over 6 million views where I was talking about people with vulvas and their pleasure and how to have more empowered pleasure. And another video with also 6 million views that was talking about a masturbation sleeve and how people with penises can use that. And they went viral and they both got taken down.
Did you repost them? Did you try to repost it?
I should actually. No, I haven't tried. I will.
It's interesting because obviously, we want content to be safe for kids, and I'm not sure if the algorithms are smart enough to determine, okay, this is she's a clinician. She's a doctor. She has the education for this. If they can decipher between that and somebody who is posting something that's harmful to kids. I'm not sure if the algorithm is there yet.
Yeah. I don't know. I see some creators who do get a lot of leeway and they use models and their content is fine. It doesn't seem to get dinged, but definitely, there's a lot of people out there who are doing their best to protect their kids. But in my opinion, I think there's a lot of censorship on educators that's getting in the way of healthy mental health and sex education being a part of what kids are exposed to there. And instead, they're getting exposed to a lot of bullying and a lot of racism, sexism, classism, and all of that stuff does not seem to be as policed as educators' content.
And have you ever thought about any solutions? Because I've been on these TikTok, meetings where they ask, educators about how we can make the platform safer. And one thing that I thought of, and I told them, I said, why don't we allow the educators to put out that content? So put your video back up where you were talking about, the 2 different videos you had. Put those videos back up and say, all right, this is the benefits of masturbation, X, Y, and Z, whatever you're saying. And then maybe allow an educator to attach a peer-reviewed article or a meta-analysis or something to where it's all right, I'm a clinician and I want to educate. Because TikTok, I saw a stat recently, I'm not sure if it's true, but it said that more people watch TikTok than YouTube.
Oh, I believe that.
I believe I've been feeling that way for a while now.
Yeah.
At least this year. So people are going to TikTok versus YouTube because they can watch your video and then 20 seconds, they learn something. Whereas a YouTube video, you have to watch it for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So like any other ideas that you can think of in terms of helping show, okay, I'm a doctor and I want to educate people who otherwise may not have the resources to get this information.
I mean, this might feel a little bit over the top, but one thing that they could do is require some kind of identification verification.
I've heard that before.
So that, people have to verify their age, and if they're not of a certain age, then they don't get exposed to certain kinds of content. Or creators could put, age limits on their accounts that say if you're not over 16, you shouldn't watch this, something like that. But it's tough to monitor those things.
Yeah.
Especially when there are so many fake accounts out there.
Right. It's fake accounts, burners, spam, and on Instagram, how's that been? Or do you feel like you have to be more professional on Instagram versus TikTok? I sometimes feel like that.
I have such a love-hate relationship with both Instagram and TikTok. And Instagram is starting to censor sexual content as well,
right.
Sex education content as well. So it's sort of the same. But yeah, I mean, I do think that Instagram has a little bit more leeway, and you can. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I haven't had the same kinds of problems as I have with TikTok.
Right. But it's important. And even I feel like on your podcast, we talked a little bit about, because I talk a lot about ADHD on my page. And, people with ADHD, you might have, some sexual dysfunction that comes along with it, whether you want a lot of sex or whether you're having issues, sensory issues that might impact intimacy. So I think it's very important to talk about sex, because, for example, like I remember back practicing telling certain patients, hey, this is this medication, it might affect your sex drive, X, Y, and Z. And if a medication is impacting their sex life, I can't, as an adult male, expect somebody to continue taking that without at least wanting to know, does it get better? Does it get worse? So I do feel like we need to talk about it more. And I'm always looking for ways to get that information out there.
Well, I also look at like things, and I'm so glad that you do that, right? You bring so much content and awareness about all of the mental health conditions that you talk about, specifically ADHD. I've learned so much from you.
I appreciate that.
And I feel like, we have to look at things like what's going on right now in this country, where there are a lot of people who don't seem to have basic education about pregnancy, about the way conception happens, and there's just so much misinformation out there. So, I mean, if anyone from TikTok is listening, please let the educators have these conversations.
Yeah, please allow us to have the platform to educate.
Right. It's scary how little people really understand and get taught about these topics if they're not going in as a professional to more education.
Right. And I also believe that it doesn't just fall on the women, also the men as well. And sometimes, like with males, like you might be one track minded. And obviously, like before I was professional, like in my teenage years, like women deal with their period, their cycle. This is how things are for them, in the sexual landscape. But as a guy, you might turn a blind eye to it because it doesn't affect you. So like, what do you think the male's role is in education as regards to sexual health, and also protecting women? Because there's so much that we can do, but sometimes we have to hear from a woman and also from a clinician. Like, you're educated, so you're like doubly qualified to speak on this.
Well, thank you. I really feel like we all have a responsibility, regardless of our gender, to do better in understanding what the experience of other people is. Because, yes, I am a cisgender woman, so I can't speak to what it's like to be a man, but I certainly can talk about my experience of men, and as a provider and a clinician, the things that I observe and see. And it's when we all stop to do that and stop assuming that we know everything, because most of us walk around, right? And our experience sort of stops right here, and this is all we're aware of. But when we can sort of take those blinders off and do the due diligence to learn about, why do these people have this experience? Why does this group feel this way? Why is this something that I'm hearing a lot from these people over here? Instead of bristling and getting defensive about it. Right. If we could just lean in and try to get curious with each other, I think we would see a lot of anger just like subside, because the defensiveness and the bristling just keeps us like this with each other. Right. And that's not very helpful at all. So what I think men can do is listen to women And when you feel that stuff, that anger, that frustration, that absolute fury come up, listen to it, but listen to it as a cue that something's getting activated in you. And you're angry, but I doubt it's at women. It's probably at something that you felt was a truth is no longer a truth. Right? And that's really hard to be like, oh my God, everything I knew about the world could be different if I believe this.
It's tough to see that way.
It's so hard. It's so hard, but it's really necessary because we all grow up in these really subjective experiences. And when we're talking about sex, it gets really dangerous when we assume that we know anything about someone else's experience, or that our values have to be the lens through which everybody views sex. It's a myopic, egocentric, and, early developmental way of thinking. So I encourage everyone to sort of elevate their thinking and step outside of their own paradigm to get curious.
Yeah, no, especially with so many different, populations and people identify in so many different ways, it's important to be open and to say, I don't know. And I always take that route. Like if somebody asks me a question on TikTok Live or Instagram Live and I don't know, I'll say, hey, I don't know, educate me. Here's my assistant's email. If you have an article or something that I can learn from, send it to me so I can learn. Because every day I'm constantly learning things that I never knew. So like I just want to listen to women and ask like, what's their experience? Straight women, gay women, however somebody identifies, like what's my role? Because I believe that like it goes both ways. But sometimes if tell me if I'm wrong, but if people aren't already listening to women, sometimes a guy will respect it more if he hears it from another guy, unfortunately. Have you felt that?
I've totally felt that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think there are a lot of socio-political influences that shape how we see ourselves as individuals and shape the way we view our membership in certain groups, right? And what I mean by that is if I identify as a woman, I have membership in this group of women, right? That's an identity and a membership for me. So sometimes our identities and our memberships really create a lot of bias, because if we were to step outside of the unwritten or unconscious rules of our group and say, hey, but what about this? Right? Then our group might be like, I don't know about you. And we run the risk of being cast out of our group. So on a really primitive biological level, we have all of these loyalties to the groups that we belong to. And I think that's why sometimes men will listen to other men instead of women. But that's the kind of behavior that we have to stop. Right? We can't just listen to our own echo chambers because it's not useful and it's just the same information bumping around, in the ether. So I have to ask, I don't have to, I get to ask questions to you, to this person, to that person, to say, tell me what I don't know about what you see in this world. And when we do that, God, it's magical.
And that's, I think, because, a lot of times you have issues between men and women, or even with same-sex couples, if somebody believes this one thing, they believe that. And then the other person believes that. But like especially if you're in a relationship, y'all on the same team, it's you all versus the problem. Instead of sometimes trying to say, I'm going to die on this hill, I'm going to be right. And sometimes you're arguing in mid-conversation, you realize that you're wrong. And I've done it before. And you just keep going. I'm like, all right, I'm wrong, but I don't want to admit that I'm wrong. I want to just keep going, So I agree with that. And I want to backtrack a little bit to, we were talking about ADHD. And of course, I talk about ADHD in relations to my page a lot. And you can have issues with, intimacy, issues with communication. Sometimes that affects, your sexual life, for couples. So what do you think, can be done for couples that struggle with intimacy, especially where at least one person in the relationship has ADHD? What are your thoughts on that?
That's such a great question. Well, whether it's ADHD or another condition, I think what's super important and what I try to help couples work through is getting as much information as they can about that condition, so that they can really start to understand it together. Like you said, as a team, this is the condition. These are the symptoms. These are the things that we are going to be navigating together. So when they come up, we're on the same team when we look at it together. So get a ton of education, just absorb as much as you can so that you also can kind of say, like, this is the condition. This isn't a conflict between us. It's not a war that we have to fight with each other.
Exactly.
And that's super important. And when people understand the symptoms that they have and where it comes from and what the options are, they feel a lot more empowered to work together and to brainstorm ideas. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with every idea, but coming up with lots of ideas and kind of talking through the pros and cons together can really bring couples together.
Yeah, I like that. And like you said, it extends to other conditions. Like depression is one I can think of easily where you might be depressed. You might have like, a loss of sex drive. And then like I've had couples, and it's so like sex is at the core of a lot of things. Like I've had patients to where I've had women tell me that because of how they're doing mentally, they have no desire to have sex. And they'll tell me, hey, Dr. Kojo, I'm afraid that my husband will leave me because I know that if I can't perform in this manner, like it's going to end the relationship. Or some patients in of like a manic state, maybe having too much sex and like that can affect your relationship, So like what are some key things that you've seen in your practice or on social media that people have done to help enhance their sex life?
As it relates to those specific conditions?
Right, as it relates to their mental health.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is getting the symptoms of their mental health condition more contained. So if somebody is experiencing mania or if somebody is experiencing depression or anxiety, or PTSD, really prioritizing getting help for that condition so that the symptoms can abate and they can get closer to their baseline more readily and with more support. When people do that and they prioritize their mental health and their partner supports them in prioritizing their mental health proactively and preventively, and then of course when symptoms flare up, that usually has the best outcome for couples in their sex life, right? Because A, the symptoms are abating. B, they feel really supported and really cared for. And when we're in relationship with our partners in our adult lives, that's our person. Right? And so when we feel cared for from our person, it really does create a lot more safety in the relationship. And that's what can help people really open up sexually and try different things and be creative. When we don't feel safe, for the most part, we shut down.
Right. And the thing I like about your page is that it seems to be, and I know it is, it's a safe space primarily for, women. But I'm curious because I saw a swipe up post here on Instagram where I don't know if you said something along the lines of, tell me something that people don't know or like a secret or something that's taboo. You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I did a story a few weeks ago, and the question prompt was something
so interesting.
Along the lines of, what's one sexual secret that you're keeping from your partner?
Right. I love that. And I remember because I watched it like twice. It caught my attention. What were some of the things that you heard that were kind of shocking to you?
I mean, nothing really shocks me anymore, but some of the things that maybe would be more common, I read a lot of things about people wanting to include others, like maybe have group sex or have a threesome, and they didn't want to tell their partner about that. People feeling like they couldn't share a fantasy, a different kind of fantasy or a desire for kink in their relationship. A lot of people who had had significant sexual trauma in their past and felt like they couldn't share that with their partner because they didn't feel safe or they didn't want their partner to worry about them. Of course, infidelity is sort of the obvious thing that people don't tell their partners. What else did I?
That was such an interesting, all right, so let's back up to where you said people want to include somebody else. How would that have you ever had to explain to couples about how that can come up in conversation? Because think about it, if you entered into a monogamous situation, relationship, marriage, partnership with somebody, and they come out of, seemingly left field and they say, I want to include somebody else, that might throw off the dynamic of the relationship maybe forever.
I mean, it can, yeah, especially if people are not really intentional and thoughtful about how they introduce that topic. Certainly it can throw a wrench in things, but Yeah, I've worked with a lot of couples and a lot of individuals who want to bridge that conversation with their partner. And a lot of what we talk about is examining the fears around it and the meaning about what it would be like to introduce someone into the relationship, or maybe to open up the relationship. And I'm finding, actually, probably in the last few years specifically, less and less people are having really adverse reactions to the idea of it. I'm not saying everybody does it, but more people are saying, am I okay with this? And
Right.
could I be, maybe? And why would I or wouldn't I be? Which I think is an interesting shift. But people open up their relationships for lots of reasons.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And do you think how much of that is cultural? Because like I'm new to California, so like I've been here for 8 months now, and I'm learning. I feel like, I could be wrong, more couples are open to things like that. But back, in Atlanta, Nashville, East Coast, where I'm from, there was a lot of, this is my person, this is who you're going to be with. And sometimes I feel like that kind of leads to like you feeling like you kind of own the other person and jealousy. But like it seems to be very laid back here in California. Is that like the culture here, or?
Well, definitely when you are in any sort of metropolitan area, there seems to be a higher level of sex positivity.
Right.
So my practice is in LA, Miami, Chicago, and New York.
Okay.
And,
wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
I love
Yeah.
that.
I'm kind of in all the big cities. Not all of them, but the biggest ones.
Right.
And I think that definitely skews the population of people that I might work with. They might be more sex positive. They might be more open to diversity of thought, diversity of mind, because they already live in that area. But I grew up in very conservative rural areas and work with people from those areas too. And, there are some people, in big cities or in less big areas who really are true to a monogamous orientation.
Right.
And then there are people across the geographical differences who are open to, but definitely in the bigger cities, you probably see more.
Got it. And you mentioned the term sex positivity. How would you define that?
Great question. So sex positive, to me, is really about not having shame about your relationship to sex, and not shaming other people with their relationship to sex, even if it's different than yours.
Wow. Okay. I like that, because there's so much shame that comes with like having a past. And my thing is, like, people will DM me all kinds of things, and obviously for legal purposes, I can't really reply to a lot of them. But I see what people are saying. I was wrong. This person did that. They did that. I didn't know that this person did that before me. So when you take away the shame, and you can detach yourself from, oh, this is what I did, but this is who I am. Would you agree that it's along the lines of
Totally.
like that?
Yeah. I mean, I love that you're bringing that up, because a lot of people really get so shame bound and like just stuck in this rabbit hole of shame and low self-worth when something that they have done or something that is their truth is scorned by other people. Right. And it's so important that we differentiate the behavior of people from the person.
Right.
And we can, maybe not like things that we've done, but hopefully creating a relationship with yourself that really values yourself.
That's awesome.
Without any of that judgment is so important, especially as it relates to sex.
Yeah. And in terms of like the work you do with couples, because for some reason, I kind of know why people ask me relationship questions, because mental health does affect relationships. But people will ask me questions like, so-and-so cheated, stepped out, X, Y, and Z. Do I take them back? Do you ever have to work with couples who are trying to overcome something like infidelity?
Oh, all the time, yeah. I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. So
like, this is what I do.
Yeah, I'm often working with people around how to repair betrayal. And it's really hard. I would say it's probably 50-50, the couples that I work with that stay together and who don't.
Got it. Okay.
But it can be possible. And when those couples who are really committed to working through it, both partners committed to working through it, they can actually grow and have such a strong relationship after that moment that it's so beautiful and inspiring.
That's awesome. And I, on TikTok, my algorithm is all over the place. I get into like obviously the professional side and also with Gen Z and millennials. And when it comes to things like infidelity, like this is what the kids are saying. I see they're like, oh, if so-and-so cheats on me, I'm taking them back, but I'm going to cheat on them. what's your stance on that? Because I think that, like, if you take somebody back, that should be water under the bridge. You know,
Well,
I could be wrong.
no, I mean, I agree with you. I think people weaponize sex all the time to act out whatever other emotional and relational needs they have. This is what my book is about.
Okay. You gotta plug that in.
Well, it's not published yet, but working on it.
Okay.
But so we really have to sort of separate ourselves from using sex as a weapon.
Okay.
Because if you're going to take someone back, I don't necessarily think it's just, okay, water under the bridge, we don't talk about it anymore. That doesn't really help the healing process.
Okay.
But
I
definitely
like that then.
taking them back and cheating on them just to get revenge,
Right.
that's not
Right.
going to help you heal either together or on your own. It may
Okay.
feel good in the moment, but it's not sustainable.
Right. And if you take out the sex for a second, do you believe that there's such a thing as emotional cheating?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay. And can that be as destructive to relationships as like cheating physically?
Yeah, look, we can cheat financially, we can cheat sexually, we can cheat emotionally, we can cheat spiritually, and the defining feature of cheating is being dishonest or breaking an agreement.
Got it.
Right? So whenever your agreements are in a relationship, those have to be held as sacred, because without them, your relationship is nothing.
Right.
Right? It's just a farce.
Mhm.
And as I said before, when we're in adult relationships, your partner's your person.
Right.
And so that's so important that you protect that relationship with, as much integrity as your system will allow you to do.
And are people ever able to overcome something like cheating and live a life that was better than how the relationship was before?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they can. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Right? And both people have to really, really want it and be willing to show up really differently for each other and themselves. But yeah.
And when a couple comes to you, and I'm asking because I'm curious, when a couple comes to you, is it normally let's say it's a heterosexual couple, right? Is it the man or the woman who approaches you first?
Typically, the research suggests that women are the first
Right.
to seek out therapy. That's for a few reasons. Women are socialized around their emotions more readily
Right.
and around their relationships to be more present and available and not shamed about them. So for a lot of men who have been conditioned not to be very emotional, not to explore their feelings, they may be less willing to self-refer
Right.
for treatment. But I mean, I get a mix.
And so if a woman reaches out to you and she's like, "Oh, I want my partner to come," but they're hesitant, like, are there any things that you've done that have proven to be successful in getting a partner to be on board with therapy?
Absolutely. I mean, whenever a couple wants to work with me, usually there's different levels of motivation, different levels of trust in the process, different goals even. So I have a consultation with them both, and we talk about all of that. What are your hopes? What are your fears? Where do you think you're going to get stuck? How can I support you in those moments? And, whenever somebody is a little bit less willing, we just try to explore what they need to feel like they can be engaged in the process.
Okay. And in terms of how many years have you been practicing clinically now?
I mean, I've been in this field since 2005.
Okay, wow. So that's at least 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you've learned that you could tell, people online that would provide them with hope as it relates to sexuality and relationships?
That's a great question. Let me think about that for a minute.
It's a lot of years of experience,
Yeah. It's so hard to think of like one or two sound bites without being reductive. Well, I guess what I'll say is this. Most of us have been lied to
Right.
about sex and about relationships. And I don't necessarily mean that in a malicious or
Right.
evil way, but because most people don't get enough information about
Right.
how to have healthy relationships.
Or misinformation too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so important to learn about things like emotional regulation and to learn about how your own body responds to things like feeling safe or feeling threatened, and to understand that is always at play, right? We are always assessing, am I okay or am I in danger? Am I okay or am I in danger? And that survival mechanism in our brain and our body guides our relationship to sex and guides our relationships with partners. So when we can really get clear on what we need to feel okay, that's going to really be a make or break in a relationship, because it allows you to understand your boundaries more effectively, to communicate your boundaries more effectively, and to show up for yourself and your partner in a way that's really mutual. When we don't have that skill set, then we end up walking around just a little bit more guarded and a little bit more in our survival brain. And it shows, right? In our relationships, we're more defensive, we're more prickly, we're more Barbie, like little barbed wires trying to interact with each other. And sexually, we may not be present. We may be dissociative. We may be experiencing dissatisfaction or sexual dysfunction even. Or we may be weaponizing sex to try to get some other need met.
Okay. And I'm curious, hearing you talk and provide all this good information, I feel like, when it comes to sex education, guys may not want to seek that out because, we have this, image that we have to uphold where we don't even talk to our friends about the issues that we're having. So we're like, oh, I'm doing okay, I'm fine, So in a lot of, guys' minds, there's no such thing as erectile dysfunction or anything like that. So for the guy who is hesitant to reach out for help, how would a guy start that process? Because it's pretty hard to say, hey, I'm struggling sexually, especially to tell another person. How would you recommend, for males to go about doing that?
I mean, that's such a great question, because when people are in fear, it's really hard for them to move through that fear sometimes. But I would say that the definition of courage is leaning into the fear. And
I like that.
Right? And a lot of men really are organized around feeling courageous. Now, I'm not saying that you have to feel that way, but if you're looking to try to kind of maximize the energy that you have, if you can lean into the fear a little bit, the reward is huge. The reward is so big. And, talk to the providers that are around, that are available to you. Ask them questions. Find out how they can help you. You can even call and without even sharing your name, just get information to find out what you need to know to feel safe. And like it's a process that could be worthwhile for you. I've worked with so many men over the years who are exactly like what you just described. They're scared. They feel ashamed. They don't know where to start. No one ever told them to expect what they're going through. And sometimes it even feels like if they get help, then they're not man enough. Right? But that's one of the ways that we've been lied to in our culture, right? Every human being has feelings. Every human being has a relationship to sex. So men are no different. Men are people too.
Right. And I like the fact that you said that. And when we were talking about how to keep women safe, I said guys have to play a role in that. We're all in this together. And when it comes to men being vulnerable, I think that women can play a role in doing that as well.
Yeah.
I've had so many men reach out and say, oh, I told my lady one thing and she held it against me for life. So, they're going to shut down. So how can women create a safe space, for men, or even in different forms of relationships? How can you create a safe space to allow them to talk about things that may be shameful?
Well, this comes back to what I was saying earlier about really understanding where you feel threatened and where you feel safe. Right? And each person's thresholds and each person's ways of being are going to be different around that. And so when you're in relationship with somebody, making those agreements to protect each other no matter what is so, so, so important. And that often means showing up differently and promising yourself and your partner that you're not going to hold things against them.
Right. And you're making that promise as a team. I like that.
Team. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because we all get super self-protective, and sometimes those things don't happen on purpose.
Right.
But we miss the mark with our partner, and it's not only to be expected, but it's to be expected a lot that we're going to miss the mark with each other. But how you clean it up and repair that together is also a really important agreement, because like this person who told you, this person's been holding this against them. That's awful, right? Now they don't feel safe.
It was tough. And, also because I'm a clinician, I'm also a guy. So I try and not be, on my high horse, like, oh no, if you don't speak about it, you'll never get it figured out. But then I think to myself, oh, if I was dating somebody and then she told me that, it'd be hard to move forward. Like I remember this guy was saying that, he feels like he's going to be compared to guys in the past. It's almost like you're walking on eggshells. And it's hard to feel like, oh, I'm secure in this relationship, when it comes to, sexuality. Because I feel like as males, that's at the core of our identity. If you can't perform, it's like you're not almost a man. So we have to detach ourselves from that notion.
Well, that's a great point that you bring up. And let me just say one thing about that. Sex is not a performance. This is another one of those things that a lot of people have been lied to about.
Okay, that's one of those moments.
Yeah, sex is not a performance. And when you show up for sex as if it is a performance, you're stripping yourself of an authentic relationship with your own erotic truth.
Okay.
And with the ability to co-create a sexual adventure with another person, right? And so when we can sort of take the performance piece out, stop attaching our worth to sex,
right,
sex gets better.
That's a game changer.
It is. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say it before.
Really?
Yeah, that's a game changer. Because, and that's why it's important to break it down and say it's not, and it puts you all back on the same team.
Yeah.
You're not trying to outdo yourself or somebody else or a younger version of yourself.
Exactly.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Is a phrase like that. I would imagine you can tell a couple that, or somebody, a male or a female or anybody, and that would be a game changer to them. Has that been effective?
Yeah. I mean, definitely it can be very effective. Some people don't believe me for a while. They have to keep performing for a while. And that still doesn't work.
Right.
And then they come back eventually and they're like, maybe I'll try something different.
Right.
And they have a different experience. And when people trust that process and they lean into it a little bit differently, honestly, it can be so much more mind-blowing.
I think it's liberating, and especially with male mental health, and this is something that I'm trying to get into that space. Like, I watch my numbers. 78.2% of my followers are women on TikTok, and over 80% are women on TikTok, on Instagram. So I don't have the male population, but for the ones that do reach out to me, like, I see these issues, and it's hard to get into that space because if you put out like sexual health information for women, they'll take it and say, okay, how can I get better? But for men, sometimes if there's a problem, it's hard to reach out. So it's always hard. And I'm looking at TikTok, I'm looking at the trends. I'm always trying to figure out how I can weave and get in there. Because a phrase like that, I think that's a game changer. That it's not a performance. So many people see it to be a performance. I'm competing against so-and-so, where it's just you versus yourself.
Totally. I mean, look, sex, because of the way that we are socialized around sex and socialized in our own experience of our gender, right? So many men do have that idea of like, the way that I am sexually defines who I am as a man, just like you said. And that is such, how do I want to say this?
It's a corrosive way of thinking, in a sense.
It is corrosive. Yes, it's corrosive to their identities, to their sense of worth as human beings, right? And men are already conditioned to view themselves as worthy as their last task. Yeah. Right? Or however useful
that's very true.
Right? And that's just so terrible because you're worthy just for being.
Right.
You're breathing right now.
I like that. Worthy. I love that.
Yeah. And I think, if you can find a way to speak to men about that, since men listen to men. Right.
That's a good one. That's a good one, yeah.
It could really help them shift that paradigm too.
That's awesome. And, before we get out of here, in terms of like trauma as it relates to sex, after somebody's been through a traumatic event, how do you, because you feel violated, it's one of the worst things possible, and you're not responsible for what happened to you. How do you reclaim your life after an event like that?
Great question. Oh, I wish there were just a simple cookie cutter answer for that. Right. But each person's experience of sexual trauma is different, and the way that it impacts them and the wake that it leaves in their lives is very different. But for anyone who is listening and does want to learn more about that, on my YouTube channel, Modern Intimacy, I have about an 1.5-hour webinar that I did. It's free, all about the effects of sexual trauma and how to have hot and healthy intimacy.
I love that. We'll play that in for this episode.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. It's really helpful because sexual trauma impacts our identity. It impacts our ability to regulate our emotions. It impacts the way we think about the world and relationships. It impacts our friendships, our relationships to family, our professional potential and our financial potential. It influences our medical potential, our parenting style or our desire to be a parent or not, our spirituality, our creativity. I mean, it has tethers in a lot of different domains of life, and then it becomes a feedback loop for how we experience sex in the present, right? Do we feel safe? Do we feel empowered? Do we feel okay? Can we let our guard down? So really kind of like thinking about how you feel most impacted is first the most important thing.
Right.
And then creating internal supports and community or external supports to help you kind of augment and take your power back and proactively set different boundaries, keep yourself safe, in the best ways that you can, and, really kind of heal that wound.
That's fantastic. And when I talk to patients about this and they're telling me what's happened to them, and I'll say, I'm so sorry for that, and we'll work through it. And I think to myself, how many more people don't have access to care and they're keeping this inside?
Yeah. Even people with access to care keep it inside because there's so much shame and so much fear and so much hurt around this topic. So, anybody listening, reach out, get help, because it is, it's such a violation in the moment, and it's one of those things that just continues to hurt, right, at different milestones in your life. So getting support and getting therapeutic care can be a game changer.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you all watching at home, if you're struggling with, assault of any kind or any type of issue where you feel like you've been violated, I always say it's good to go out and get help. And where can people find that the webinar on YouTube? You said Modern Intimacy?
Yeah. My YouTube channel is called Modern Intimacy, so you can check it out there.
Modern Intimacy. Okay. And where else can people find you on social media?
So on social media, on TikTok and Instagram, it's at Dr. Kate Balestrieri, and on Instagram also at The Modern Intimacy.
Okay.
And my website is modernintimacy.com.
Oh, that's fantastic. And once again, y'all, that's Dr. Kate Balestrieri. I got it right.
You got it right.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
They left me on my own when I was in the stick. I cut the heat on 350, run the city with my brother in the distance. I pass it, he never miss it. Hey, I just been in it for a minute. I'm loyal, I'm never switching. My brother, he got a sentence. Don't come to me about your feelings, I really ain't tryna listen. On the road to the riches, I promise I won't forget you.